the best part of being on the last end of these webinars is that all the previous speakers have done the works. They have taken care of all the analytics, and they just take off a lot of burden from one. So I'm going to go even more personal on some aspects, and I'm going to jump back and forth with some elements because otherwise every other base has been already covered, I believe. Also, wonderful takes. Beautiful take by Sonia, by the way. Fun fact, I know I'm maybe losing time with this, but de las Casas, Ley de las Casas, I read somewhere, had also a project of a commune in Cariaco, in eastern Venezuela. Something that didn't happen anyway, but it was one of them in his writing, some project he aspired to engage in, but it never happened, of course. But almost all being said, I mean, this was another example of another election under duress. Personally, I would have liked even a more split map. I know it sounds contradictory, perhaps, but I would have liked to see even more presence of the legal, coherent opposition that also exists in Venezuela, because this, yes, of course, it means a lot internally, and it also adds up a lot to the moment, the Numantin moment that we have to deal with in Venezuela. Just like Cuba, we're being surrounded and not by water. So in that sense, it creates an interesting and uncomfortable divide. For once, yes, of course, inside the country, it is significant how many things are re-strengthened, and but on the outside, it's going to be weaponized some way or another, regardless of what we have not seen yet coming from the usual suspects or from the usual places. And but also have different explanations to this, and I'm still thinking about the opposition in this case. For example, I know for a fact, and many of us know, that many of these leaders, locally or nationally or internationally, have been under a lot of pressure and threats from the more radicalized extremist factions of the opposition. There's a silent ongoing war in that front that we need to really take into account. It's not that easy either to detect, but it is there. So it makes even more commendable what people like who have been considering him an idiot for the last 15 years, people like Enrique Capriles, are actually having the political decency to know how much, not only because they lose a lot of political capital themselves, they already did, they also have suffered from the consequences of the hybrid warfare in general, but also because it takes, at least it's another step in engage in actual, very needed politics in Venezuela. The other aspect that I think it also adds up to this and also makes even more crazy the other factions, it's precisely the backlash on a very grassroots level that the deportations and the whole Palestinization of Venezuela and the penitentiary colonial system that's been built in Central America regarding deportations, not only, of course, of Venezuela, but we have seen how the viciousness it has been exerted against the Venezuelans. Many of these were actually opposition, passive or active, to the government, and now they find in a place that they're being actually rescued in many cases by the government, which I think it brings a lot of cognitive dissonance. Also, in this sense, yes, a very quiet day. I vote on actually more of an opposition stronghold. I amuse myself calling it a frontline commune, because it's also organized as a commune. It also participates with very important rates on the consultations, the frequent consultations regarding local projects that are going to benefit the whole commune. And for the people, this is a full disclosure moment, I guess. For the people that know Caracas, it's pretty funny to hear about La Comuna de las Mercedes, Santa Fe, Prados del Este. I mean, it's pretty funny of the kind of moment we're actually living right now, and also it talks about the demographic change that have been ensued in time for many reasons. Saying this, and one more thing about this, it's taking into account what, for example, Sira said about the commune. I will add something else which makes it even more worthy to take into consideration, because she was, well, she said it like as it is, but it's also a tough, not sexy, not spectacular process. This is a daily thing that deals with a huge, insane amount of frustrations, contradictions, economic distortions, classic stupidity, political folklore, and so on. So it's even harder. It's a very, very hard moment. Now I can also quote slightly Professor Marandi, who talked about, for example, how on an interview he gave to MISIÓN VERDAD, how his friends from Hezbollah and the Lebanese resistance during the first stage of their liberation, before they actually kicked out the Israelis from southern Lebanon, they weren't that loved. Actually, they were thrown, stones were thrown at them. They meant trouble when they appear because of what the enemy would do, reacting to this presence and so forth. And when the triumph came, they all were supportive of this. So of course it's not a similar situation, but it also describes, slightly in a very less violent and intense environment, what kind of challenges they have. Also, it's very uneven how it happened inside the country, locally speaking. I'm very sensitive to this matter, and I worked for a long time in one of these states that actually was recovered politically. So it's not the same. It wasn't the same regarding Zulia or Barinas or Nueva Esparta, especially because this is local politics, and that has a lot to do. And these were spaces that the party operated as an opposition, but at the same time, depending on the context, as actually representatives of the state, not necessarily the government, but many institutions were actually still under Chavista ministries, et cetera, et cetera. So they played a very different role, and in some cases very challenging, very sharp, and in others pretty frustrating as well. In the case of Barinas, I know, for example, that one of the explanations of the victory was the low turnout of the opposition, and also they were very split. There were like 4 candidates, but in the case of in the case of Nueva Esparta, it was the difference. It was a very intense, strong struggle, and they actually, a very different dynamic. Saying all that, you have to also keep in mind that this is happening elections in a moment that basically, if you see what, especially in the Western Venezuela, it's still a Western country, the GMO politics war and the clash of engineering, the significance of elections having, which also makes them quite hard to relate to or to deposit all your trust in them. But at the same time, it strengthens it also has to take into account how this is part of Venezuelan law and the ways it has been engaged, and how next calculations, regardless of what I said, a less enthusiastic approach to this, our president have, which is always 3 steps ahead of chaos, just like El Comandante taught us. Thank you very much.
I'm Michael Hudson. I'm appearing here for the International Manifesto Group. If you like this video and ones like it, please subscribe. For more information, go to the address on the screen.